college hockey, obviously you're selected by the college, you're admitted. You guys all know how that works. So then players are going to be drafted into the NHL. The National Hockey League, that's the big one, that's the teams that everybody follows, and mostly American teams, also some Canadian teams. That's the one that I'm trying to actually talk to you about. There's a draft, and what that means is that there's going to be 7 rounds of 30 teams picking one player at a time out of a pool of players that they're trying to fight over. So think of it as a scarce resource. It's a huge event, publicly televised. I watch it every year. It's really great as far as you get to see the next stars. You get to see the next faces of your game as they're selected and where they're going to be going. So if your favorite team is, maybe they didn't do so hot this year, well, that means that they're going to be picking before other teams. And the picks are laid out in a way that is pseudo-random. It might be called procedurally generated or something like that, where if you are the losing team, you have, I believe it is like 20% chance of getting the first pick and 100% chance of getting the top 3 or 4 picks. So if you don't get the first, you'll definitely get one of the top 3 or 4. And they lay it out in a pseudo-random way like that, where it's like you're not guaranteed, and there is a lottery for it, and they televise that too. They hold up like cards, and then they'll be like, the first pick, the 30th pick is this, the 29th, and they go all the way, and then the first pick, and they'll hype it, and it's like a big, sports jerk off. It's fun.
So you say it's by lottery, not like last season's rankings or anything?
Right. So if you were the worst team in the league,
Oh.
you have a higher percentage chance to get the first pick.
Oh, higher percentage.
Higher percentage chance in the lottery.
They would in baseball they do it the opposite way. So it's like if you the shittiest team, you get the pick first.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, but you have
higher percentage chance to get the first pick.
Oh, I think you said lottery for some reason.
No, it is a lottery.
It is a lottery.
They call it a lottery. But it's not. It's pseudo-random.
Okay.
It's a weighted lottery.
Okay, interesting.
So, so it's like, if I'm the worst team in the league, which last year would have been like the Panthers, the Oilers and the Buffalo Sabres were like the two of the worst teams. And they both were like, who's going to get this pick? I think the Sabres were actually the worst. And they were like, we locked it down, guys. We've got to have this pick. All their fans are going crazy. And then they didn't get it. And the people who got it have had so many first picks in the past couple of years. They've had, I want to say 5 first picks, and they pick really amazing players who are actually pretty good. And then the team just sucks still. And nobody knows how. Nobody knows how this works. They're looking at it and they're like, how do you screw this up? You have the best players, you're paying them no money, and you still suck. These are the kinds of things that surround the draft. It gets us all a little heated, and it's very fun.
As a player, do you have to go to whatever team you're selected for?
We're going to talk about that. It's very interesting that they actually do have a choice. They have a choice. So last thing I want to say is that first round is the best players. Second and third round, you have good players. Players that are in the second and third rounds are they're going to play NHL hockey almost always. Fourth to seventh round, they may never play in the NHL. So you're drafting them in hopes that one of them will be good enough to play at your level, but many of them will not. Sometimes you get sleeper players who were drafted in the 5th round and they're amazing now, and nobody knew what they were talking about because these guys are great. And then you also have players who are in the 1st round who are total bombs. It's why did we draft this person 1st round? They suck. But most of the time, as a general rule, the 1st round players, especially the top 10, are amazing players who will play either within a few years or who are showing so much promise that it's they're amazing. I would say out of every draft, you usually have 1 to 3 players, 3 is a lot, who will play the next year, the coming year after the draft. As soon as possible, they'll be playing in the NHL. Very few are actually going to be able to do that. Most of these players need 2, 3, 4 years before they're ready to play. And they are drafted around the age of 18. So most of the players that are drafted will be 18. I think 21 is the oldest you can be. If you're 22 or up, you're not eligible for the draft anymore. And if you're under 18, if you're 17, I don't believe you're eligible either. Maybe there are some exceptions, but for the most part, it's 18-year-olds, some 19, few 20s, and very, very few 21-year-olds. So once you're a player that's been drafted, let's say I went first round, first pick because I'm the best, then the players are, possibly signed, and they can be lent out to other leagues, and they almost always are, to actually be able to play competitively in a league that is right for them. Some players go to Europe. Most players go back to the team they were drafted out of from the CHL or their college team. This is negotiated between the organizations. The rights of the player are leased or lent, usually given for free, to another team. So that they can develop. The player benefits from this, the other team benefits from this, and your team in the NHL level benefits from this because that player is not ready to play in the NHL. And if they do, they'll be in way over their heads and they're not going to get better. But if they can go back and play with people their age and their skill level and be good in that league, then they're going to benefit a lot. They're going to gain confidence, they're going to gain knowledge, and they're going to get better. That happens a ton, and there's also the AHL. So these players who don't get lent out to a team, maybe they've finished college, or maybe they're older and they're showing a little more promise. They'll play in the AHL. This is the farm league, so to speak. That means that anybody who's not being lent out and also not ready to play in the NHL, or simply isn't good enough to play in the NHL, plays in the AHL. So every team, the Boston Bruins, for example, has an affiliate team, the Providence Bruins, who are a hockey team. They're called a minor league team in Providence, Rhode Island. And so players will go from Boston to Providence, and Providence to Boston. And the teams are managed by the same organization for the most part. And all of the top people who, the general manager, there are general managers for both teams, but the GM for the Boston Bruins pretty much has the final say over what happens on both the teams with the players who are signed on an NHL level. So some players might be signed on an AHL level, that's separate. We don't talk about them. They don't matter. Because they're never going to play in the NHL. They're not very good. But many NHL players will be lent down to the AHL. This is interesting because it means that they can still play even though they're not necessarily good enough for the NHL. And they don't necessarily have to be lent out either. This opens up a ton of ability to train your players and have them practice and do well in a competitive setting. Question about whether or not they have to sign. We can talk about that next. Contracts, this is to me the most interesting part of hockey. The game, that's great and all, but there are numbers. And it's going to be a lot of money, and it's going to be trading of assets and stuff like that. And it works in a way that is highly regulated, I would say. There's a lot of rules and regulations, and I would say I know a lot of them, but it's crazy to know all of them. So the first thing that happens after you're out of the draft, contract-wise, is you are offered, or maybe not offered, an entry-level contract. This is standard, it's 3 years, the maximum is $925,000, the minimum is $575,000, and most players who are going to be first rounders, they're going to give them more, and most of the other people get less.
Is that per year or?
Per year.
Okay.
Per year. So those numbers, when I'm talking about salary, I'm talking about what they're making per year. And the contract length is over 3 years in this case. They will make, $575,000 per year. Athletes are paid this much specifically because they're putting a lot of their human capital, so to speak, their body, on the line to the point where if they're injured or if they simply play the game for a long time, it will deteriorate their body and they'll no longer be able to work after they're not an athlete anymore. This happens a lot, especially in football. And that's why athletes are paid so much. It's because later on, they're probably not going to be able to work at all, so they need a lot of money to put in savings.
So are those capped by a player union or the league?
So the league works with the Players Association. The NHLPA, NHL Players Association, is a union representing all the players and they fight for their rights, so to speak. They have these agreements with the NHL called collective bargaining agreements. And there was one in 2005, and there was one in 2013, they happen about every 8 years, where they reassess the state of the league, what the rules and regulations are. A lot of the things we're going to be talking about were decided by these agreements. Let's see. So the Players Association will fight for the players, and for example, something that the Players Association fought for was they want to make sure that 50% of all revenues are being handed out to players as salary. So like that's their number of like, we want to make sure at least 50% of revenues from the league goes to player salaries. That's how they negotiate the salary cap, which is something we'll talk about later. But yeah, so if you don't sign, this is an interesting part to say. If you don't sign a contract, or you are not offered a contract, you're offered a contract, you can say, like, screw you, I'm not going to sign this for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't give you enough money. Maybe you just don't like the team that you were drafted to. That's fine. You have the right to choose. In 2 years, if you are still under 21, or still 21 and under, you are eligible for the draft again. So after 2 years, if you don't sign yourself, or they don't offer you something, and therefore you don't sign, you are eligible to go back into the draft. Wonderful. You're now drafted to another team, maybe you like them better. And if you are drafted, let's say, so if you are drafted, you are not signed, or you choose to not sign, you are now over 21. So you're not eligible for the draft, but you haven't been signed yet. You are not eligible to be signed by other teams until those 2 years are up. Then they'll give you what's called UFA status in Group 7, which is this like very small group of players that they classify players into groups. And Group 7 is basically, it's been 2 years, you're not eligible for the draft, and you also weren't signed, so you get to be an unrestricted free agent. Unrestricted free agents, which we'll have a whole talk about later, can be signed by any team. Any team can offer them a contract. And then after they sign, they go back to restricted free agency, which is the next topic. So this entry-level contract is very specific. You have to give them 3 years. You have to give them between these numbers. The rights belong to that, for that player belong to the team for those 3 years, just like with any other contract. But this is very standard. You do not get to have more than $925,000. You can't offer a player that much, just because that's what the Players Association and the league have agreed to. Let's see. They're often loaned back to the same team they were on before the draft. I talked about that. Great. Restricted free agents. Here's a picture of a restricted free agent. And that's Dougie Hamilton. He was traded away because he's an asshole.